Hey, Insta. All right, we are live. Hello, everyone. I'm Beth, founder of Botanica Beth. We're live on Instagram. It is 11 a.m. Eastern, Thursday, May 21st. And so we are also live on the Botanica Beth brand Facebook page. So head over there. Sometimes Instagram works really awesome. Sometimes Facebook works. So if one or the other, just jump onto the other one. All right. I see some of you. Hey, Jenny. Hi, Nessa. So today we are going to talk about deschooling, because during these times, so many of us are homeschooling, and it's for those of us who have homeschooled, what homeschool or doing school at home from our traditional school setting is, it's not the same. So we are, who knows when this is going to be over, right? And I wanted to let you guys in on just some of our family story on how we embraced deschooling after homeschooling crashed and burned. That's all I'm gonna say. Homeschooling for us, when we first took it on, crashed and burned. It was the most stressful, defeating, I've never felt like such a failure. So deschooling. So a little bit about us. My husband and I, we live in Michigan. And so, that's important for two reasons. Every state's homeschooling laws are very different. So we are in Michigan. So a lot of the homeschooling things are not an option for you, or something I might say might be totally different based on what state you're in. So just take that as a grain of salt. And, I'll talk about how you just need to look up your state's laws. So my husband and I, we've got 3 kids now, and our daughter is our eldest. She's 9, and we have an 8-year-old son and a 1-year-old son. And so, my husband and I, our story was very fast. We met, we fell in love, we had babies, we got married. It was all within a year. So we were those people that when you know, and none of our kids were planned. They are all beautiful surprises. And we love Michigan waters. We love, my husband's from Colorado. He is a skiing maniac. My kids are skiing maniacs. So we just naturally love the outdoors. And for us, you're going to see, the more I share, that nature is really one of our guides, one of our mentors, and our playground in a lot of ways. So we live on a small hobby farm. And I say hobby because we've tried a ton of different things. Some of them have been super productive, super amazing, and our veggie garden always fails. So I know that all of you guys, are posting all your amazing vegetables. This is the first year we're getting back into trying vegetables. And I joke that we were planting a couple hundred plants of tomatoes, but it's because we usually have a 1% yield. So we'll let you know. We are really great at raising pigs and chickens and turkeys and chestnut trees, and vegetables are just not our sweet spot. So, but our deschooling process. So I'm going to walk you kind of through our journey in a timeline, because it just makes sense. So our oldest is 9, right? So 6 years ago, we start in Michigan. A lot of people do preschool. So, and I talk like I don't know this, because we were also the first of our friends to have a baby, by almost 9 years. And so all of our friends have little babies right now, or are pregnant and just kind of beginning the journey. So we felt very isolated. That was the first thing that I should probably mention. We felt very isolated because all of our friends were, just starting out their big careers, or going into graduate school, or walking out of graduate school when we got pregnant. And so it felt like a very isolating journey homeschooling did for us. And, you know, it really began in preschool. So we sent our kids, both of the older kids, to preschool. And we were both working, my husband and I, full-time as hairdressers. We owned a couple salons. And like many of you guys know, hairdressers work a lot of hours. And now with the pandemic, I think it's really getting illuminated that hairdressers don't have a lot of support behind the scenes, right? So if you're not cutting hair, you're not getting paid. And that's the biggest piece of the puzzle, you know, as a hairdresser. And so the first year that our kids were in preschool, we were both working. And it just made sense. Everybody else sent their kids to school, so we sent our kids to school. It was a local preschool that everybody raved around, and that's just what we did. We live in a very small community, so we don't have a ton of options. And the first year was just, oh, they'll get used to it. They'll get used to it. They'll get used to it. It'll get better. It'll get better. Oh, it's just part of it. Because it wasn't a very smooth transition for us. It wasn't great days. It ended in tears. It started in tears and ended in tears. And it was very stressful, right? Like, the kids, I'm sure, were ready for school to end at the summer, but us as parents were also ready for it to end, because it was just as traumatizing for us to send them to school fighting, like with the fits, and then coming home and having meltdowns. It was hard. We didn't know how to navigate that. And it wasn't always us, because we were cutting hair. So somebody else was picking our kids up, and they were like, your kids are so awful. And I'm like, okay, this is even worse. So we did the first year of preschool, and then we did the second year of preschool. And this is where things changed. So my husband, in between those, realized he no longer wanted to be a hairdresser. So he started to study for the LSAT to go into law school. And that was hard, because that, after, you know, kind of just doing hair and having young babies, he was learning an entirely new skill, right? So he was exercising muscles that hadn't been used for a few years, and it was a large commitment of time and resources for him to do that. So the preschool thing and the work and the paying the bills really fell on my lap that summer. And it was when our daughter turned 4 that Christmas. She's like a Christmas-ish baby. And I had worked so many hours as a hairdresser and was so exhausted from getting these kids up 2-3 hours before school to make them lunch and just to play with them for an hour, and then to go to have somebody else pick them up from school. And it always ended in tears and a 12-hour workday. That was when I was like, we can't keep doing this. Something's got to change. And that's when we began to really look at what if we homeschool? What is homeschool? What does that look like? I was not homeschooled, and neither was my husband. So this was new. We had really dear friends who unschooled. And so we had a thread into someone's life whose kids were middle school, just going into high school, of like, oh, like they do it. And that person had a thread into a huge community. So we began to start to ask questions, and the massive fears came up. The fears around socialization, right? Because we're going to pull our kids from their friends, and who remembers their friends at the age of 3? But that was our fear. And society has this pressure of like, I mean, and you guys, these fears are still, they were there, 5-6 years ago, they were there 10 years ago. Those were the fears. When I met my unschooling friends, I'm like, how do you raise your children? And these are the fears that have been coming up for decades and decades, right? They're the same fears around homeschooling. So how are we going to socialize our kids? Sports, right? Me and my husband both did team sports at school. That they must not be able to do that. And it was very black and white. How are they going to learn how to read? And what about math? And how do they learn self-discipline, right? Like, you're going to take this 3-year-old who, we all know 3-year-olds, and 4-year-olds. Like 4 is amazing. 3, tough for us. How is this like self-discipline, this self-guided learning, right? This homeschooling thing. And what about college? We both went to college, my husband and I. How are they going to get into college? And then there's also the legalities of it, right? So that's where you're going to have to look into each of your state's regulations. So we finished out that year because we had to. I needed a babysitter while I was working. My husband was now at law school. And so we started to interview kindergartens because all of a sudden it's like, okay, so maybe it'll just change when we go from preschool to kindergarten because they're going to be switching buildings, switching teachers, switching environments. And we began to interview kindergartens. And this is where we looked at private, we looked at public, we looked at many publics, we talked to principals, we talked to charter schools, and there were some common threads that were the problems that we were having in preschool, we were hoping would go away in kindergarten, and they weren't. And for you, they might not be a big deal. For us, they were big deals. We live in America where childhood obesity is very high. And I believe that a lot of weight and nutrition in like a very healthy, encouraging way begins with hydration. And so one of the big things in preschool was they just regulate the drinking, the water intake, because they quote unquote can't spend all day, watching kids go to the bathroom and helping supervise, which I get, maybe that's a full-time job, especially when there's 20, 30 kids. But my kids were dehydrated and asking for more food when they were really thirsty. And so water was important for us, of just being in tune with your physical health, but also just hydrating your fatty tissue, which is your brain. The time outside, right? So these kids were doing full days of school. So what was the time outside? They had 30 minutes. And I said, okay, so how do you handle discipline? And they said, well, the first thing we do is take minutes from recess, and it fixes them like that. And for us, that did not work. So we didn't believe in punishment as a form of discipline. And then it was really when I read this article, and I'm still searching for, I'm going to have sick my husband on it, but it was talking about children's brains being turned on at critical thinking, like really learning. I think it was about 10 minutes a day. And I was like, so what if we could do that 10 minutes? And it was just, those were the thoughts that we were having as we shifted to how do we homeschool? What if? So my husband's, and then we go back to our scenarios, right? So I went to public school my entire childhood, and I would have loved to be homeschooled. So I think that's how we wish we would have been schooled, is probably one of the biggest tugs of curiosity. And I didn't love it. I can't see comments. I'm trying to click on comments, but I will, record. I'll record and save everything. So as it's, I revisited mine. I struggled with reading. I would shake and be so flushed with anxiety to do public speaking that I'd have me be running to the bathroom. So speech class, public speaking class. I was the kid in reading class that would fall asleep, right? So we would read like a book out loud, and everybody would like take turns. I would just it was so stressful, I'd put myself to sleep, right? And I'd take a nap, and then I got yelled at, and then I got shamed publicly in front of my peers. So I can't say that, and I spent a lot of time in detention. And so school for me was not necessarily a beautiful experience overall. There were beautiful teachers who nourished so many parts of me that really allowed me to get through it, is kind of how I just got through it. And then I went on to go to college. And I still take classes because I'm addicted to learning. I love education. And then there's my husband, and he was raised in private schools, and he loved it. You know, he went to an all boys school, and he had a huge group of friends that all played sports, and it was just so different. So we had both public and private. You know, we knew that. We knew what it looked like to have these experiences. And it was a very, very, it's a courageous act to homeschool. It still is, because you are like going to step outside of what most of society does. And it's courageous to be different. And it's like you have a community, but it's even more courageous to do what is different from what your parents did. And that is a big element of deschooling. And, you know, so there were all these things on the table, and I was hairdressing. And when I realized my daughter had turned 4, and I didn't realize that she turned 3 because I was working like a maniac, right? 12-hour days. This is when I knew I needed to get out of hairdressing. This wasn't going to be sustainable. To really back up, I knew it wasn't sustainable when I had my kids, because I had to return back to work very quick within a week of having C-sections. So there was a compounding trauma that was happening by living this traditional lifestyle of like, go to work hard, send your kids to school. You want to send them to a private school, work harder for more money. And it was crippling me. So I knew I needed to get out of hairdressing, because what had happened behind the chair was happening within me was my kids were showing me a mirror, right, of things that I needed to deal with in order to let them really be themselves in their education. And so that's when I really shifted out of dyeing people's hair and embracing natural hair. So you guys can see my social media post, I think this week, is all about embracing your roots. Like, look at how, whoop, they're growing. And, you know, just not only removing the chemicals from that, but just processing the emotional shift of some of those expectations of what we should look like, right? And around image and beauty and that whole industry. And I realized I was really guiding my clients from these physical healing and physical band-aids of a quick haircut or a new fresh color of the season into shifts energetically and spiritually. So when we really settled into homeschooling, it failed. So this was they didn't go back, they didn't go to kindergarten. Oh my gosh, it tanked. Reading with the kids was so stressful. It brought up all of my reading trauma, and everything. And, the math wasn't so hard. I have advanced math experience, and then we were just counting and adding. And it didn't matter what it was. What my kids wanted to do at 4 years old and 5 years old is they wanted to play. They wanted to go outside. They wanted to play in the dirt. They wanted to laugh. They wanted to play Tickle Monster. And this is where we pushed and we pushed and we pushed. And my husband and I really became divided. And that, I think, is very common when you begin to step into homeschooling. It's usually one parent is all about it and the other one has all of the fear, right? And all of the reasons of why you don't want to move forward with this. And that's okay. That's normal. And so, my husband was on the side holding all the fear up and the timelines of when they should read and the timelines of when they should add. And by second grade, they should be doing this. And by third grade, they should be doing this. And by fourth grade. So homeschooling in that ecosystem did not work. And this is when we really shifted to deschooling. We did that for a few years, right? And then I got pregnant. Third kid, like, oh, pregnant? So the month before I got pregnant, I had decided that I was going to do the education that I had to earn for. I wanted to be a doctor. I want to be a doctor. And what I realized is I didn't want to be a doctor and go to medical school. So I didn't. I went to hair school and became a hairdresser. Imagine parents' thoughts on that, right? And I love natural stuff and herbs and land, and all of this inner work started to kind of build this tornado. And then somebody said, you can become a naturopathic doctor. And I wanted to learn again. So there was an opportunity to start that program and just do one class a month. And it would have been very slow. And so I said, yes. And then I got pregnant. And that is when I realized what deschooling was. That is when I realized this is an individual sport. My husband was in law school, so he's not going to deschool, right? Deschooling is healing. If you guys haven't heard it that way, for us, deschooling is healing. And it's an individual thing. And we were reading, and I can post this link, but for every year that you have been in school or educated, you take 1 month of healing. That's kind of a very loose, rough formula. So let's use my husband as an example. Preschool, right? He went to preschool and all the way through high school. Didn't skip any grades, so just traditional year after year. Did a 4-year undergrad. He did a year of trade school. And then between studying for the LSAT and studying for the bar and law school, it was about 5 years. So he has 23 years of education. So that is almost 2 years of healing. So first things first, figure out how many months you have, and you have to give yourself permission to rest and heal, because you're going from something that has been systematically created and set and orchestrated for you. Here's what you do. You say yes, you do this. You take this test, you do this. You do this, you do this. It is step by step, right? And so deschooling is the long haul. And then we look at my kids in a stark contrast. They were only in preschool for 2 years. So they had 2 months. And kids are quick. So we, in our heads, were 2 months. Really, they switched around in 2-3 weeks. They slide right back into connected joy, right? So the hard part we have found as we talk about this and share about this is really the parents. And the parents need to do this, we believe, because if we don't, we hold boundaries and we prevent our kids from really stepping into their own abilities with learning and becoming self-disciplined, right? And really what self-discipline is when you find something you love, you just naturally want to learn more about that. And so the naturopathic doctor, I love herbs and oils and natural medicine, and I think that we need both. So I just creatively discovered a path for that. Kids are the same thing. Have you ever seen a kid with some Legos? They might build the thing in the book, but then they come out of their room 4 hours later with this object that you might not have any idea what it is, but that kid has orchestrated a magically, wonderfully interwoven, intricate story to go with that object. And those are the steps we want to achieve. And so there will be a time where you are going to feel a ton of emotions. You might be so angry and so mad and pissed off at your parents. You might be mad at yourself. Might be mad at your kids. It's probably all going to be in there. And you have to start to process these emotions. And then there will be a time where you are extremely bored, right? And during this pandemic, I'm sure so many of you guys have already experienced that when the kids are like, I'm bored. And you're like, for us, we celebrate boredom now. So I want you to write that down. Celebrate boredom, because what happens when you allow space for boredom to sit, that's where creativity is born. And that is where exploration will happen. And that is where the magic and the drive and the thriving happens of learning and wanting to be engaged in your own intellectual, emotional, physical health and growth. So, when I'm going to talk a lot about myself. I've got this going on the blog tomorrow. So if you're just popping on and you maybe need some reading or some reminders of what I'm saying, go to botanicabeth.com/deschooling. And all of this will be up there along with the recording. And so let's talk about my story, right? So I've got almost 23 years of education as well. And it's hard to face our own stuff. So let's focus on just facing our own stuff here. Enrolled in the naturopathic doctor stuff and was pregnant. And that year before, I spent a year on my yoga mat crying because life just was too much for me, too much pressure. I felt just, it reminds me of that quote now that if you don't take time to rest and heal your body's going to make it happen. That's what happened to me. And I sat on my mat and I cried, and I share a little bit more of this story in the collaboration, the book. There's a free book out there. I'll post that link as well on the website for you guys to hear about my story, but also my husband's stories in there. And that was really kind of our beginning chunks. So, the deschooling, when I was sleeping so much through this third pregnancy, I could not keep my eyes open, right? And so it really became time to address what emotions was I dealing with, what food was I eating, what came up, the first two birth traumas, right? Because when you get pregnant, guess what? You have to have the baby. It's that you're going to birth the baby. And then I was thinking about what I wanted this birth to look like, because I was so different on the inside. I knew I had the courage to be different on the outside. And so, I was sitting on one hand, I had the two births that were both cesareans, and I went back to work 5 days after one and 7 days after the other as a hairdresser. And that was very traumatic for me. And I've done a massive amount of healing around both of those. And it was abandonment came back up, rejection came back up. And, I was looking for, how do I process this? This is when I started to sit on my yoga mat. And for some of you guys that have been around, you remember the year of indigo. Do you guys remember that? And it was so healing. So when the indigo really came in, this is where I realized I needed Mother Nature as a mentor, right? So in the book that Andrew and I both contributed to, it is talking about how Mother Nature is our natural mama in deschooling. And so that's where I started to integrate tools, right? Like teas and salves and lotions and essential oils, and really started, what can help me? I need something to hang on to. And then I began to really dig into rhythm and rituals. And rituals that honored me, like drinking a glass of water first thing in the morning, right? To wake up my brain, wake up my body. And then I also got into natural rhythm. So as a female and menstruating, I considered a hysterectomy kind of a year or two after our second child, which would have not led to any more kids, right? So I didn't end up going through that, but there's a reason I was considering that. And so in the realm of this journey, I stumbled across the book called Lunar Abundance by Dr. Ezzie Spencer. And it gave me a tangible, like a mentor, a book, a resource, guided meditations to really begin my lunar alignment, right, into the moon cycle, because women flow with the moon cycle. And so that was a piece of my soul that I felt was missing, and just being raised without it. And then we shifted and we really started to honor. In Michigan, we have ridiculously long winters, but you can ski them. Snow or like fall is always so welcomed. And then spring is when we plant, but it was cold, so we have all 4 seasons here. And so we wanted to, instead of saying, oh, when is winter going to end? We started to say, when is the first day of spring? When is summer? What is summer? Why do we have the first day of summer? Where did that even come from? And we began to get into the solar alignment of the sun and our planetary bodies and the cosmos. And all of a sudden, you're learning about planets, right? That's what they do in 5th grade. So as you can see, as you start to go through deschooling, and if you like alignment with Mother Nature and these natural lunar and solar rhythms, you'll see that the education just kind of comes in. It just happens when let's learn about the moon. Oh, it rotates. Are we rotating or is the earth rotating? And these are the conversations we're having with our kids. What is the earth made of? How big is the earth? How far away is it? What is an eclipse? How does that interact? And you're learning all the way while you're going through this, just because it's curiosity. And then, so we did the lunar, the monthly stuff, the monthly rhythms and the seasonal rhythms. And then all of a sudden we kind of had a backbone to our year. And then I realized, am I the only one doing this? And so I began to get my wellness support pack together. And this is where deschooling, I was like, I'm healing my physical body around having babies. Do I have the right physician for this? I am learning yoga pregnant. Do I have the right practitioner to guide me? I am, so I started, do I have friends that believe me? Because, like I said, it is a courageous act to do and raise your children very differently than how you were raised. That the people who love you the most want to protect you the most, so they will often project their fears upon you of, their struggles, right? So there will be times where this is not beautiful. Getting in and experiencing trauma is messy. Healing trauma and getting out of trauma is messy. So as a society, we like things to be pretty, put away, right? It's why we maniacs clean our house for strangers, right? And then let it all go for our family. And then you need the support group, because the fear comes out of trying to protect you and protect your family. But the fear is very hard to take when you articulate boundaries of this is what we're choosing and they don't honor that. So that's a whole nother story of navigating boundaries. But, you'll struggle, you'll stumble, you'll fall. Your kids will push against you. Your spouse will push against you when you guys are going through your own healing stuff. And you need a community of people who say, you're going to make it through this. Or, you know what? I experienced that too. You're not alone in that. Or reaching out like, oh, when does my kid start her period, right? Like those are the conversations. And so am I going to call the person who sends their kid to public school and pretends the period doesn't happen? Or do I want to have somebody who experienced that and they're like, yeah, well, they menstruate on the full moon, and it gives that child a community too. And so, because we don't need to be raising women any longer suppressing what naturally happens to our bodies. And so this is part of deschooling, is finding that community that wants to reconnect and rewild into that authenticity. And so, there's been times that we struggle and I just want to like complain or vent. And if I'm doing that to the wrong a person who is not in my designated support pack, they just say, well, maybe it's time that you send your kids to school. Maybe it's time that you just move on. Maybe you'd make more money if you sent your kids to school. Like, it comes in all the ways that you think it's not going to come, it comes. And so you need that support pack that has a diverse array of personalities, but also aligns with that path, right? So we had a hard time finding our community at first. Years. Like, it took us 5 solid years probably. And now we feel like we found our pack. And it is because we love nature, like wildly love nature. It's where we go to recharge our batteries. But we also love technology and respect technology and use technology. And so we were having a hard time finding a beautiful blend of support in those two realms. And it just took time. And it was, the more we talked about it and the more I healed and released expectations around schooling or what my family had to look like compared to this family, the more people we found. And so that is my biggest piece of encouragement. The more you heal, the better it gets. And then your kids, you start to see your kids just as they are. It is so beautiful. So, just a few things. I know the first few questions I always get when I start talking about this are, what do we do when our parents push back, right? So parents, community, friends, just know that they are most likely doing it out of love, right? They want to protect you. They also probably when people have fear, it usually is illuminating a part of them that they don't feel like they could do this. And so, I always remind myself, if people are not happy with my choices, but they're not bringing anybody harm, right? Like, I feel like I'm thriving, my kids are thriving in this. If someone is unhappy or projecting their unhappiness, it's probably because they're unsettled or unhappy. It's something in their own life. And that's okay. That's why deschooling is healing. And deschooling, I think, is not something that is like super popular or super broad. Like, not every people are like, what does deschooling even mean? Because deschooling can be messy, right? It is messy. It is very healing and messy. But it's also so beautiful, right? So have grace with yourself. And I'm thinking the next call I should do is probably around boundaries and how to navigate some of those hard conversations. But I think the reason people push back who are really close to you is because, they have, those fears are stemming from their core beliefs. Maybe they don't think that they're smart enough to homeschool their kids, right? Because we put in our society like this smart compared to what degree you have, so that is there. And maybe they don't believe that they're worthy of that freedom of choice in what they desire to learn. Because I think that's really buried. Because if you were sent to school and you went through school, you didn't get to choose what you were learning each day or each year. Like, the curriculum is set and you follow, right? And then you're tested on it. So there's this, am I worthy of making my own choice? And then it's just this, am I capable, right? Am I capable? So the fear comes from other people's core perceptions within themselves. And so if you're being triggered by those, probably something inside of you still needs to be worked out too. And just recognize that, right? So for me, my husband has a Juris Doctorate, and here I am pursuing a doctorate. And for the longest time, right? And I used to work as a pharmaceutical scientist, and I had this core perception that I wasn't smart enough to homeschool my kids. Like if doctorate level degrees don't qualify you in your head, that means that we are off, right? Smart does not equal degree. In love, like learning, in the soul fire. And so that was my work, and I'm still working on it, and my husband still is working on it. And so this deschooling for us, kind of like, what's next? What does this look like after this? We deschooled, right? We got my 23 months in, check. Be cautious of that approach, because you'll feel it inside you. If you retreat back or you go back to school, you might have to start all over again, right? So I love that gentle, like 1 month for 1 year, but I also think it's very dependent upon the person, dependent upon the family, and for me personally, this is something that might take years, right? And maybe this is just my work, is to help you guys navigate deschooling from a place of healing and really allowing yourself to heal. So as we step out as mothers, we are holding a beautiful space for our children to do that. And that's a lot of my work. That is my work. And so, what is next? What happens after deschooling? Maybe you're like, all right, the kids are gonna fly. They always do. Kids are amazing. That's when you start to look at what is homeschooling, right? So maybe this opportunity of you having your kids at home and they're virtually learning, the curriculum is set, maybe that is where your kid is thriving, and you need to recognize that. Maybe you are like my kids and you love a little wild nature. You love a little technology. You can totally get down with Legos, but as soon as there's fresh powder, like the mountains call. That's more of an unschooling approach. And, radical unschoolers really let their kids lead the way. And those are some of our best friends unschool. And their kids have gotten into college, right? There's another big thing. Kids have gone into college if they choose to go. And if they don't, that's fine too. For us, we homeschooled, and then we unschooled, and then we deschooled. Oh, and then we wild schooled. And we tried that. It was kind of just one hand of, our pendulum. We got off balance too much with wild schooling. And then there's the forest school, which is like just outside. And then there's world school, which are families who travel the world together. And then our kids, I would say our kids are more unschoolers. And mommy is a deschooler. And daddy is deschooling, probably unschooler, maybe wild. He might be the wild schooler. But we let our kids choose a lot of their stuff, all their stuff. And they love a co-op. And so that was a beautiful thing for a couple years. But in that couple years, we also spent 2 of those falls interviewing schools again because they were curious. So we welcome that when our kids are curious about stuff. What does it look like? What is a school? Let's write a list of questions we can ask. And a lot of schools are like, well, we don't like the kids to come to get their hopes up. And, I'm like, maybe you don't know my kids, because my kids are like, they want to be engaged, right? They want to know what they're getting into and how their days are going to be. And so, and in that they were writing and reading and socializing with these adults at a very high level. So, interviewing these schools and letting these kids lead the way at like 7 and 8, they were hitting all of these marks, and it was fine. We were fine. And, the co-op thing, it's been beautiful, but with the pandemic, it got brought home and on Zoom, and it just didn't become beautiful anymore for us. And, if it goes back to face-to-face in the fall, we'll let our kids choose. They said yes so far. And if it stays online, we're going to say no. And that's one of the freedoms of, you know, our state and our family choices is that. So just a couple resources. If you're like, yeah, like homeschooling failed, unschooling failed, wild schooling failed, forced school failed. Like we've tried it all and nothing is clicking. My encouragement to you is to put on the brakes and discover deschooling and discover how you can heal your personal journey. And if you love the nature stuff and the natural rhythms of the season and the moon cycles, I'm a great person, right? But if you're like, nope, then I would research more and find somebody that you feel really aligned with, because you want to feel like you're like, they've got something I want. And you might not know how to put words to it, but if somebody has something you want, tap into them, because like success, they'll leave the trail of nuggets, right? Like people will see when I totally put on the brakes and kind of come off social media. It's a rest, right? It's the winter season. I'm hibernating. And then right now it's spring, everything's coming, we're planting, we're nourishing all summer. That's why I'm online, I'm sharing more. So if you like that rhythmic, you know, the Botanica lifestyle might be a perfect fit for you. So Lunar Abundance, Ezzy Spencer, she's my favorite, just a gentle person who's created a beautiful ecosystem of support to get onto lunar alignment. And website, I have the link to our homeschooling in 2020. That was a collaboration. You can read a whole bunch of stuff in there. Like it was math. It was, you know, Andrew and I talk about deschooling, and somebody else talks about curriculum, unschooling, older kids, college, entering college. That book, Homeschooling in 2020, was so fun because it was a little bit of everything. And so that's a free download. I'll link it up on my website, botanicabeth.com/deschooling. So thank you guys. If you have any questions, comment below. Instagram, this is going to live for 24 hours.